In early 1976, Henry Kissinger privately admitted to the Venezuelan president that American intelligence had failed. Despite their global surveillance networks, the CIA only learned that Cuba had sent an army to Angola after the troops were already on the ground. Moving an army 9,000 kilometers across the Atlantic while under a strict economic blockade appeared to be a logistical impossibility. Yet by the time the first official U.S. statement was released in November 1975, the initial deployment was already complete. This initial mission began a 13-year commitment. The presence of Cuban forces would eventually force a retreat of South African units and alter the political landscape of the entire region. In late 1975, Angola was a landscape of competing factions. Following the collapse of Portuguese colonial rule, three separate liberation movements fought for control, with the capital, Luanda, becoming the primary objective.
From the south, the South African military launched Operation Savannah. Their armored columns covered hundreds of kilometers in weeks, aiming to install a sympathetic government in Luanda that would serve as a buffer for their own internal apartheid system. With South African forces only days away from the capital, the leader of the Marxist MPLA, Agostinho Neto, requested urgent military assistance from Havana. Cuba's response was an independent decision. Castro acted without consulting the Soviet Union, choosing to intervene at a moment when Cuba lacked the specialized ships and aircraft usually required for a transatlantic invasion. To bypass detection, the first 650 Special Forces soldiers flew on aging Bristow Britannia passenger planes. They dressed in civilian clothing and carried their small arms inside personal suitcases, mimicking the appearance of tourists. But heavier weaponry required much more creative packaging. 75mm cannons and mortars were dismantled and stored in the cargo holds among crates that the flight manifests described as agricultural machinery. The maritime logistics were equally improvised. Merchant ships used for hauling sugar and nickel were converted into troop transports. Soldiers slept in cramped quarters on the decks of commercial freighters for the duration of the weeks-long crossing. Lacking transatlantic range, Cuba secured refueling rights in Barbados, Guinea-Bissau, and the Congo. By utilizing commercial flight paths, Cuba moved a combat-ready force without triggering military alarms. Their civilian planes and ships simply didn't match the signatures the CIA tracked. The conflict shifted from a covert insertion into a decade-long war of attrition. Cuba established a rotation system that kept thousands of soldiers in the Angolan interior year after year, supported by a continuous flow of supplies. This sustained presence strained Cuba's resources. The ongoing U.S. embargo forced the military to improvise constantly, such as when they had to navigate the severe contamination of essential aviation fuel shipments that were routed through Guyana. The war peaked in late 1987. A major South African offensive threatened to seize the strategic base at Cuito Cuanavale, an event that could have collapsed the Angolan government's defense. Havana responded by committing 50,000 additional troops. This time, they used larger IL-62 jets for rapid transport and shipped squadrons of MiG-23 fighter jets by sea, providing a level of air cover that the South African Air Force could not match. Hundreds of T-55 tanks and long-range artillery pieces arrived, providing the Angolan and Cuban forces with the heavy mechanized support needed to hold the line. This rapid mobilization of heavy armor and air power stalled the South African advance. By the time American analysts fully understood the scale of the reinforcements, the tactical situation on the ground had shifted. The stalemate at Cuito Cuanavale demonstrated that South Africa could no longer achieve a decisive military victory in the region. Facing high costs and an entrenched enemy, their elite battalions eventually began a withdrawal. Over 13 years, a total of 380,000 Cubans served in Angola. More than 2,000 of them lost their lives to combat, accidents, or disease during the mission. The military standoff led to diplomatic negotiations. In exchange for the withdrawal of Cuban forces, South Africa agreed to end its occupation of Namibia, allowing the country to achieve its independence. The loss of control over Angola and Namibia removed the northern buffer zone that the South African government had relied on for decades to protect its borders from regional threats. This regional retreat coincided with growing internal unrest and international economic sanctions. With its military reach curtailed and its isolation deepening,
the apartheid system entered a period of rapid decline. 13 years after those first 3 passenger planes landed in Luanda, the map of southern Africa had been redrawn. Namibia was free, and the government in Pretoria was forced to negotiate the end of the very system it had invaded Angola to protect.